So this is probably the longest break I've taken in terms of doing videos, so I appreciate your patience. Just finished the book about a month or so ago, and got a couple projects around the house. I started a year ago and finally finished. And the classes, which I talked about, I think, almost a year ago, so it looks like it does take this character Chris about a year to get on these plans. But it does happen. It always happens in the same way that everything works out in the end. And so I've got a couple videos and a big stack of videos I haven't done yet. And I'm just randomly going through them. I wanted to start with the management illusion because it's so tied in with the self-illusion. And it's the thinking mind that stumbles upon a watch and then interprets that there must be some kind of watchmaker. And that may sound innocent enough, but the thinking mind, the abstract mind, is obsessed with some type of captain, some kind of pilot, some kind of controller of the goings-on. And that's why every country needs a president, every state needs a capital, companies need a CEO, and of course, companies need a manager. And a lot of this is attributed to Frederick Taylor, who in 1911 came up with this management model that so many of us just assume is so obvious, that there are managers and then there are workers. But Frederick Taylor came up with this, that there should be a clear division where the managers tell, through language, of course. It might be more interesting if they had to mime it or something. But they have to tell the, quote, employees what to do. And most of the what to do comes with efficiency. And so maybe it's the Industrial Revolution, but us humans became obsessed with making things very quickly so that Ford could make a car so fast that the paint wasn't even dry. And that seems to be somehow not just tied in with progress and success, but it's tied in with this idea that there's a manager behind the whole thing, just like there's a little you upstairs. And of course, the problem with that is, in the same way that if there was a self somehow in the skull, behind the eyes, between the ears, telling everything commands and what to do, there would have to be an even smaller self in that self telling it what to do. And so in that same way, who manages the managers? And that goes back to the ancient Greeks with the phrase, who guards the guards? And, what would we do without governing people? Well, all of nature has gotten by completely fine without managers, without CEOs. Trees grow, grass grows, and it all works out very harmoniously. But us humans, we kind of got into this obsession with bureaucracy. That's left brain bureaucracy, which actually, I think that was the very first video I did. It was all about left brain bureaucracy and organization. Remember that old story where God says there's truth and the devil comes along and says, well, let me organize it. Part of the organization is management. And a long time ago, Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States back in the 80s, said that government could leave for 3 weeks and no one would notice. But the truth is, government doesn't exist, so it can't leave. So all of this management talk, all the government control, bureaucracy, none of it's real. It just is an illusion, the same way that the self is an illusion. Now, one of the things I get asked quite often when I do something live or I'm doing a talk and someone has gone through great suffering is, how do I deal with this? And it's a perfectly honest thing to ask. But a lot of it is tied in with the management illusion. So we want to manage our emotions. And there are actually dozens of books out there, how to manage your emotions, as if you can. In other words, to believe that you can manage your emotion is to believe in the self, to believe that there is some kind of controlling force that has this amazing ability to control anything. And of course, one of the reasons we get so frustrated and dive into even deeper suffering, because when I get asked this, it's usually a very legitimate type of suffering, the loss of a loved one. And how do you manage that kind of loss? But the real problem is you can't. In other words, there's no way to manage your emotions because there's nothing up there that is legitimately in control. There is no one to do the managing. And that may sound a little scary at first, but on the other hand, when you see through the self-illusion, you see through the management illusion, you realize nature takes care of itself. In other words, even though these emotions may be dreadful and quite a bit of suffering, trying to manage them is a form of avoidance. And one of the things we know about emotions is that they're here to be experienced. And once they're experienced, they have a tendency to fade eventually. Now, in genuine suffering, this may take a while, but it's going to take much longer if we're caught up in the management illusion. And so when you take apart modern society, it has so many levels, not of the self, because that's pretty obvious, but has levels to the management. And so if you're a manager, well, you're just another person. You're just another hairless monkey, just, babbling with language. But behind that, of course, is consciousness playing the game of being what it isn't. And one of the more interesting forms of the game, apparently, is to pretend that there's anything that is manageable in the first place.